Greetings fellow Mist Wanderers, my name is Steve Morgan and this is DM of the Mists, covering all things Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft. I did a Fated Allies Part 1 video recently where I covered off the Fated Allies, or officially known as Strahd's enemies, A to I, so that's everyone from Arabelle to Ismark, and this is Part 2, K to Z. I think it works out that there's slightly more in this one than in the first one, although ironically I don't think I'm going to have as much to say about many of them, so it might end up being a shorter video, I guess we'll see. And in this video I'm going to talk about things like how I roleplayed them, how I ran them in combat, what stat blocks I used, especially if I didn't use the stat blocks suggested in Curse of Strahd, and things like that. I'll do my mini disclaimer like I did with the first one again. The goal of this isn't to be a comprehensive ultimate guide to all these NPCs. Chances are I'm going to refer you to other useful sources such as Curse of Strahd Reloaded by Dragon Carter, Mandymod, Lunchbreak Heroes, and so on. I'll have my own spin and my own flavour on some of them as well, so treat this as kind of like an addition to those guides, not a replacement. And I'd also like to give a shout out to an artist. Last time I only used one of his pieces of art for Arabelle, but for this segment of the Fated Allies, a lot of them don't have art in Curse of Strahd officially, so I'm going to use Caleb is drawing artwork for people like Stella, Victor, and a few others. So big thanks to Caleb, and you're doing great work, and may it continue. And let's get going with... Kasimir, the Seer card. The Dusk Elf accompanies the characters to Castle Ravenloft only after they lead him to the Amber Temple and help him find the means to resurrect his dead sister Petrina. Which means they could potentially then get Petrina as an ally as well. Although I think she's weakened when she first comes back, and only has cantrips, but still. I played Kasimir's very serious, very brooding, a voice like this, as if the whole weight of the world rests on his shoulders and he's not had a good night's sleep since his sister started haunting his dreams, which he chooses not to mention for obvious reasons. You never see him smile, that kind of thing. I didn't reveal the ears thing straight away, so I did that when they were partway through the Amber Temple, almost as a sort of, I trust you guys now, and he lowers the hood, and then they see the ears and he explains what happened. I thought was a good way to do it, rather than like straight away, oh, my ears. An interesting thing I did in my campaign is I actually changed him from a mage to a master thief. The stat block from Volo's Guide to Monsters, updated in Monsters of the Multiverse. I did this for a few reasons, because they had Victor as an ally, not the Fated ally. It's a long story. We actually did Amber Temple after Curse of Strahd and they defeated Strahd. They then wanted to tidy up loose ends, including the Amber Temple. And they had a wizard PC. They had Victor, who's a mage. They had Faran Zalhonen, who's an archmage. Then they would have had Kasimir, who's a mage. And then they would have seen Vilnius inside the temple, who is a mage. So I was like, that's too many mages. So I decided to, based on the art, the fact that he looks like he's got a dagger and stuff, and he looks more sort of roguelike and sneaky than necessarily a wizard, I changed him to the Master Thief. And I think it worked really well. At that point, I didn't have a rogue in my party either, so he was almost like the sort of temporary party rogue while they were in the temple. If you are using the mage stat block, bear in mind he's got additional spells. In his section, in N9A, in the Vistani camp in Vallaki chapter, it says he's got a Ring of Warmth, and it also says he's got a bunch of spells, including things like Arcane Lock, Comprehend Languages, Horde Person, and a bunch of others. So the good thing is if you do keep him as a mage, and then you have got people like Victor and Vilnius in play as well, at least you can kind of give him some variety. He can cast maybe some different spells that they may not have access to. I think Victor's got he's got his own spell book with spells in it as well. And if you play using the stat blocks in D&D Beyond, I believe he's got his own one in there. So if you search for Kasimir, so you don't have to use Mage, you can search for Kasimir. It's got the Ring of Warmth in play, and it says he's resistant to fire. It's got the Fate Ancestry stuff applied to it, and things like that. So as I mentioned a minute ago, the main bit of information for him lives in N9A in Chapter 5, but he also appears kind of dotted throughout the book. So another big place for him is he's got his own appendix section, so make sure to take a look at that as well, and it's got probably the most of the info, actually more than what's in the Vistani camp section in the Vallaki chapter, and it's got things like his ideal and bond and floor info. You've got bits of information from him in the Amber Temple, because obviously that's where he goes. Bits of information from Castle Ravenloft in the section where Petrina's buried, I believe. There might be a bit in Rahadin's appendix as well, although that might just be Petrina. I mentioned a bunch of this if you saw my easy to miss stuff in Curse of Strahd video, then this was one of the main points, that Kasimir's and Petrina's info is kind of spread throughout the book in places you wouldn't necessarily expect. And party fit, well, if you've got a non-magic party, then using the mage as intended is great. But if you've got a magic heavy party and don't have a rogue, you could do what I did and consider changing into a master thief. Part of me thinks, well, it does look like in the art he looks like a rogue thief type, but many people will probably argue that his sister was a powerful wizard. It probably makes sense that he's a wizard as well. But I do like the idea that she's a wizard, he's a rogue, and they're kind of both strong and good in their own separate ways, that kind of thing. Sir Klutz, the other option for the ghost card. If Sir Klutz is Strahd's enemy, then the Phantom Warrior disappears not after 7 days, but only after he or Strahd is reduced to 0 hit points. Klutz is a weird one. There's a few allies I think I talk about where I say, this was a bit of a weird ally, and this might even be the weirdest. He's kind of comic relief, because he's called Klutz, and he died by tripping over his own sword. But at the same time, he's also hard to get to. He's buried away, no pun intended, in the catacombs in Castle Ravenloft, so he's a bit of an odd one. He's got the Phantom Warrior stat block, which is a really cool stat block. So obviously this Phantom Warrior is in Argon Vostholt, and then he can be one who sides with the party and can be a goodie. His information is in Chapter 4, that's Castle Ravenloft, in K84, that's the Catacombs, and his crypt is number 33. And party fit-wise, it's a weird one. Maybe a light-hearted party, maybe an experienced party who'd like the challenge of getting him, maybe sneaking into the castle, maybe during the dinner, if they get the dinner invite, they sneak into the castle, go into the catacombs, get him out, and then he's ready for later. He's probably, as allies go, the one we've got the least info for, and there's not really much to say about him. And he strikes me as someone that not many people would use. So if you used him, or you played Curse of Strahd and your DM used Sir Klutz, I'd love to hear stories, because he seems like a very sort of rare choice. I can't see many people choosing him if it's a stacked reading, and I can't even see if it's a random reading. I'm sure many people go for the other ghost option, which I believe off the top of my head is Godfrey Gwillem. So if there are parties out there that used Sir Klutz, please let me know. I'd love to hear your stories. The Mad Mage, one of the Broken One options. Big spoiler here for who the Mad Mage's identity is. If you're not familiar with Curse of Strahd and you don't know who the Mad Mage is, this is pretty big, so consider yourselves warned. The real identity of the Mad Mage is the wizard Mordenkainen. Over the years in the Curse of Strahd community, I've seen people say that he's a very odd choice. He seems out of place. A lot of people think it's just kind of like a nod to, like a cameo, and they wanted to include him somehow, and for the older Ravenloft and D&D fans to be like, oh, I know who this guy is, and things like that. But a lot of people are like, what's he doing here? Like, you know, it just seems really odd. So some people change him. Some people change him to like a backstory NPC tied to one of the PCs. Some people, a cool thing I heard about is Victor from the future. So it's like an older version of Victor Valakovich who's gone crazy, and then does the older Victor meet the new Victor? Things like that. Some people change it to be Ferran Zalhonen, who's one of the Mist Wanderers detailed in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, which I think is a great idea. I didn't do this, but I did use Ferran separately, and my players have met Ferran. I think he's a great NPC. Roleplay-wise, I think I read somewhere that the voice, because he was Gary Gygax's first PC, right? I think that's what I've read somewhere. I remember watching a video or reading a guide once where somebody said he's supposed to have a deep, commanding voice and that kind of thing. But I think I just played him as a sort of over-the-top wizard with a very sort of theatrical voice. And, so you are the people who want to defeat Strahd. And I feel like I'm venturing into some sort of weird combination of John Cleese, but also, what's his name from What We Do in the Shadows? Matt Berry. Village of Barovia. And the way I ran the Mad Mage, so I found this guide, it's not on the Curse of Strahd subreddit, it was on one of the other D&D subreddits, where somebody said, this is how I ran the Mad Mage. I talk about this in my Curse of Strahd homebrew video, so it might be worth just checking that out instead of me repeating myself, but it kind of changes the encounter. I like the way it was done, and I think it worked better, and it's great for letting the players see, because what happens is the PCs witness sort of the Mad Mage reliving the battle against Strahd in his head, and they're kind of witnesses to it, and it's a great way to showcase Strahd's abilities in a way that's sort of risk-free to the players. So at that point in my game, my players hadn't fought Strahd, didn't know what he could do, and then they could see him casting spells, and they're like, whoa, didn't know he could do that, or well, maybe they did, but that kind of, they got to see what kinds of spells he could cast as well. I also changed it so it wasn't a real Mordenkainen, it was a simulacrum of him. Now, I think with the Simulacrum spell, at least going by 2014 rules, I haven't looked at the 2024 version yet, but I think it's made out of snow and it doesn't recover hit points, but I had it that the Dark Powers messed with it and turned Mordy, the Simulacrum Mordy, into a real boy. And so it was just like the sort of real Mordenkainen, but it wasn't the real Mordenkainen. And this was revealed to them later on, just a couple of months ago at a game actually, where they met a apprentice to Mordenkainen, and that apprentice was like, you know, the real Mordenkainen didn't go to Barovia, that was just a simulacrum. What, you think he would lose to Strahd? And so that was kind of good, because I know that's a big complaint as well of some DMs, is like, how would Mordenkainen lose to Strahd? And there's a whole thing of people saying, well, Strahd had home field advantage, and if the bat was in his castle, he'd face through the walls and all that, but still. He's got the Archmage stat block, which is super powerful, and one criticism I've heard about him being the ally is that he just makes everything too easy. You know, you have him in a battle, then it trivializes combat, the players may feel a bit overshadowed, and that's not great. What you could do, and I see some DMs do this, where they decide that he doesn't join them until the final battle, until the march to Castle Ravenloft. He just sits and chills somewhere, probably in his magnificent mansion, and doesn't join them, you know, to the point they rescue him, to, the in-between, basically. Whereas that's how I would treat the Fated Ally. As soon as the Fated Ally kind of joins them, they're there in it for the long run then. But Mordenkainen might be the exception to that rule. His information lives in Chapter 2 under the M section, that's the Mad Mage section. There's a bit of information for him in the Vistana's Tale section, also in that chapter, which is when the Vistana at Serpool Encampment, if memory serves, tells the story of the wizard who tried the uprising and failed, tried to take out Strahd and failed. Plus I believe there's snippets of info for him in the What Barovians Know section and What Valakians Know section as well. Party fit, a weak magicless party would probably be the way to go. Nikolai Wachter, one of the horseman options. This is quite a bit to read. If a character casts a Raise Dead spell or a resurrection spell on his preserved corpse, Nikolai agrees to help the characters once he feels well enough, despite his wife's protests. Although his family has long supported Strahd, Nikolai came to realise toward the end of his life that Strahd must be destroyed to save Barovia. If the characters don't have the means to raise Nikolai from the dead, Rictavio gives them a spell scroll of Raise Dead if he learns of their need. If they're staying at the Blue Water Inn, he leaves the scroll in one of their rooms. He's got no art, so I'm just going to show the classic noble art from the 2014 Monster Manual. He's a hard ally to get. There's a lot of hoop jumping. You've got to bring him back from the dead, for goodness sake. That's no easy feat. In addition to Rictavio's scroll, he could be brought back from the dead by Madame Eva. Although I think it says somewhere that Madame Eva doesn't... Like, if people ask her for help, she's like, no. Beyond the card reading, obviously. The Abbot is a good one in Brezg. He could very well do it, and then, you know, they owe him a favour. Maybe you retrieve the wedding dress from Vallaki. And there's the Amber Temple Dark Gift Zudun gift to resurrect somebody from the dead as well. I saw something on Sage Advice that if somebody's had Gentle Repose cast on them, which has been the case with Nikolai, that Revivify could work as well. But the info does specifically say Raise Dead or Resurrection. Might be complicated if Gentle Repose was cast, you know, more than a minute after he died, which it probably was. I guess if your party's really struggling and one of them gets Revivify, which if memory serves is a 3rd level spell and therefore easier for them to get, maybe you can let them have that win. And I think in other circumstances it would be allowable, but the book does specifically say Raise Dead or Resurrection. It says once he feels well enough. Now, I believe there's a whole thing about how coming back from the dead is an ordeal, it says, and the target takes a -4 penalty to all attack rolls, saving throws, ability checks, but every time they take a long rest it's reduced by 1. So it's going to take 4 days for him to feel back to normal. Also, if Lady Wachter is killed before the revival, it doesn't make sense then to start a 10-day timer, because Gentle Repose would wear off, because I think Gentle Repose lasts for 10 days, and therefore would that mean Raised Dead wouldn't work anymore. What's Nikolai's worth as an ally? Well, he's got status, he's got wealth, at least in Vallaki, and he's probably got some info on Strahd as well. If you look back to the I Strahd novel, for those of you who read it, the Wachters were there and helped Strahd during the dreaded wedding day and all that, when Leo de Disney and the other traitors staged the coup. You know, you might not have access to that information, but you might be able to give some information about Strahd from times you might have seen him or things you might know about him that his family knows about him. He's a noble stat block, which isn't super strong, but at least it's not a commoner. Info for him lives in Chapter 4, that's the Vallaki chapter, that's N40. I think that's probably the master bedroom room. And party fit. I don't know. Parriwimple, real name Parpol He's one of the choices for the Innocent card. Although he's a simpleton, he won't travel to Castle Ravenloft without good cause. Characters can manipulate him into going by preying on his good heart. For instance, he might be there to help rescue missing Barovians or to save the life of Irina, who's very beautiful. The characters must somehow deal with Bildrath, Parriwimple's employer, who won't let the foolish boy go to the castle for any reason. So he's the classic gentle giant simpleton trope, just roleplay that way basically. He never appeared in my game, so when they saw Bildrath very briefly the one time, they didn't cause any trouble, so Parriwimple wasn't summoned. I think when they returned to the village Barovia, it's a long story, I talk about it in my homebrew editions video. I said that they saw Bildrath and a really big, musty guy next to him, and that was it. How to handle Bildrath not wanting him to go? Well, they could potentially bribe him. He seems to like money, with the fact that he charges so much money for his products. Maybe they can convince him of treasures and stuff that he can bring back and sell in his shop. Or they might be able to trick Parriwimple into leaving with using something like a deception roll. There's the stuff about how they might be able to prey on his good heart. Maybe they trick him into thinking that, Bildrath doesn't want him anymore, so he sneaks away, or Bildrath said some mean things, so they get into a fight and he gets away. I don't know, maybe something like that. He's got the Gladiator stat block, which is a great stat block, but it specifies with an intelligence of 6 and no shield, so he's got a lower AC. I'm guessing he can't do shield bash as well, which is a shame, because that's a great ability. Bash someone, knock them prone, and then later attacks of advantage. But he's got a lot of HP as well, so that's good. He can be a bit of a meat shield and a tank. Information for him is E1 in Chapter 3, that's Village of Barovia. Party fit. If it's a weak, squishy party, particularly a magic-heavy party, they're probably going to appreciate that tank. Pidlwick II. One of the options for the marionette card, obviously. He's a bit of a weird one as well. It says that he eagerly follows anyone who gives it the attention it craves. One of my players actually started off wanting to kick it, and I made that DM rookie mistake of saying, "Are you sure about that?" And then he picked up on my tone and was like, "No." But it really surprised me, so I said that, but I kind of wish I let it go then, and then Pidlwick II would have just hated that PC. It says he's a stair pusher, so imagine him at the top of the Heart of Sorrow Tower, whoosh, and just roll all the way down. Rules as written, it does say he doesn't speak, but I went off raw for this. I didn't allow him to talk freely and normally, but I gave him some repetitive phrases, a bit like a pull string toy, where he would say in this kind of voice, "I love you, will you be my friend?" And when he did things that he thought were good and deserving of praise, he'd be like, "Hugs, hugs, hugs." Which I think my players were like, "Oh, he's even creepier than if he was just silent." And I can't take credit for this, I believe this is a Mandymod suggestion, but I moved him out of Castle Ravenloft and I put him inside the Vistani treasure wagon in Vallaki, or just outside Vallaki, in the rolled up carpet, in the rug. And when they rescued Arabal, they were allowed to choose one thing from there. One of my players tried to be persuasive and rolled really high and said, "Fine, you can take 2 things, but don't push your luck." And then I think one of them cast Detect Magic as well, and I don't know if this would have worked and stuff, but I wanted to give them the win for being thoughtful about that. I said that they'd send something inside the rug, so they chose the rug and one other thing, and then they opened the rug up and they're like, "Whoa, what is this thing?" Pidlwick II has his own stat block, but it's very weak. 10 HP or 16 HP if you go for the max HP. It's a construct, so not easily healed. You could potentially consider maybe the Mending cantrip. I don't think this is rules as written. I did this for when my players got hold of the animated armor in Van Richten's tower. Like, they couldn't heal it with healing spells like Cure Wounds, but if they cast Mending on it like once or twice a day, because a cantrip is like infinite use, isn't it? So I didn't want to say, "Oh, just cast Mending," because they'd always heal it, loads, but they could do it certain times a day. And only if it was like slashing damage as well. So if something slashed at it, they could heal it, but if it was suffered bludgeoning damage, no. His usefulness is that he's a guide around the castle that says he knows the castle like the back of his hand. I planned for it when they visited some people before they went to their final march to Castle Ravenloft, and they saw Blinsky and mentioned the word castle in front of him. Pidlwick II would have been like, because I should have said, they gave Pidlwick II to Blinsky as a gift. I would have had Pidlwick II go like, "Castle, castle, castle." Oh, there's another one of his little phrases. That wasn't creepy enough, was it? Castle, castle, castle. And then they would have taken him, and then he would literally just march straight in and know exactly where to go, or if they told him where to go, he could take them there. But it wasn't meant to be. Another idea you could do as well is maybe Blinsky can do some adjustments to him. Maybe, I don't know, like he learns, because it says in the book that he wants to learn about the famous toy maker who made Pidlwick II, and maybe he learns the ways of Pidlwick II is made and can make some adjustments, and maybe that leads to some additional feats or abilities that his stat block can have. Party fit, I have no idea. Rictavio, another spoiler coming up. The real identity of Rictavio is Dr. Rudolph van Richten. He is if you draw the artifact card, and he was the fated ally in my game when I did a sort of random draw, where I did it random out of the book but removed some cards first. So with cards removed, there was less chance that, so there's no chance of certain people being drawn, and so slightly more chance that he might have been picked up. I'm going to be really lazy and say I've got a whole dedicated video to everything about Rictavio van Richten, and I will usher you to that. It's nearly an hour long because I clearly have too much to say, but it doesn't just cover Curse of Strahd. I run a wider Ravenloft campaign these days, and he joined them in post-Barovia, post-Curse of Strahd adventures as well. Stella Wachter, one of the donjon options. She grants the party no benefit unless her madness is cured. With her wits restored, Stella is happy to join the party and leave her rotten family behind. And who can blame her, hey? So it says she needs greater restoration to be cured. I actually did a thing where she could be temporarily cured with less restoration, just like 24 hours. But because they had Rictavio as our ally, and I changed his spells so that his 5th level spell, I changed it to whatever it is to greater restoration, he could cast it on her and job done, they cured her. It says if she's cured, she latches onto any character who is kind to her, and she can come under Father Lucian's care, the priest at the church in Vallaki. She hates Victor, so even just like hearing his name makes her shudder and, face full of disgust perhaps. Roleplay, I'm not going to say how to roleplay her before she's cured, except that obviously you can have a lot of fun doing cat impressions. As herself though, Mandy Mod, I think a few people have suggested this, describe her as being very sweet, but because of the ordeal she's gone through, maybe she's sweet but sour, no pun intended. And now I really fancy Chinese food. She's a potential leader. I won't take credit for this idea either, I read this somewhere. She's a potential leader for Vallaki if both the Baron and Fiona Wachter are taken out, which makes a lot of sense. In my game, somebody had the idea to say, why don't you have like a council or something? And then they had Lydia, the Baroness, survived. They had Father Lucian. Maybe Blinsky was on it? At least one of the Dusk Elves. They had a whole bunch of people on it. But yeah, in your game it still sticks to the sort of one leader system. Maybe Fiona is the way to go. Similar to when I was talking about Nikolai, her father, earlier. She might know some stuff about Strahd, maybe borrow from the Strahd lore. Maybe she knows about what happened through her ancestor, what happened to Strahd on that day, and about Leo Delisne's capture and stuff like that. Because she's a commoner, she's got a very weak stat block, and it says she's chaotic good as well, I think. I think you'd be forgiven if you gave her a stat block that's either acolyte or priest. Maybe acolyte would make sense because it's not as strong as a priest, still very fragile, but at least better than a commoner. Maybe she learns some spells from her mother, or if you do the whole thing where she goes to Father Lucian, maybe Father Lucian teaches her. Her information lives in chapter 5, N for N, in the Walk the House section, and also there's a tiny bit about her in the Lady of the House section near the beginning where it talks about Lady Wachter, Fiona Wachter. Party fit, again, it's a strange one. I don't know how she would fit, what kind of party fit works best. Vasilka, the Flesh Golem in Kresk, she is one of the tempt options. Before I continue, it's taken me this many years. I was a player in Curse of Strahd from 2018, started DMing Curse of Strahd in 2020. I've been doing these videos for over a year, and it's only when doing this video that I realised her name is not Vasilka, and I said this in the part 1 video, it's Vasilka. So I don't know why I added an extra I, who knows. But hey, I learned something new making these videos, so isn't that great? There's really not much information for her anywhere, not in chapter 1, not in the information for Kresk, not even in the Abbot's Appendix. It's just little bits and bobs. There's not really much to say about her other than she's kind of like this created person. I guess there's parallels to Parriwimple, that's a tongue twister, in that the Abbot wouldn't want her to go, much like how Bildroth wouldn't want Parriwimple to go. I don't know how you would play that. Maybe getting the wedding dress was sorted out, but no, the whole point of the wedding dress is to be given to her. I don't know. Roleplay wise, she's like a Frankenstein's monster type thing. So Mandy Mod described her as being a living doll, and I do like that. I had it the abbot was trying to train her, but like she can't talk, she just makes these weird sounds, she can't dance properly, like he was trying to like show her dancing and she's just falling over and stuff, things like that really. And maybe she gets better as she travels with the PCs. That could be quite a good way to sort of make the PCs care about her. Sounds like a weird thing to say, but I don't know, like if they're traveling around with the PCs and then her talking gets better and things like that, then the PCs might feel like it makes things feel a bit more worthwhile, I guess. One thing as well while preparing this video that I never really thought of is if she's wandering around Barovia, she's going to freak people out if they take her to places like Krezk, into Vallaki, and people see her. I think it says that they only realise who and what she is if they get really close to her. But she's in the Blue Water Inn and someone's like, hey, who's that woman there? Oh. And then they, have a proper look. The Flesh Golem stat block is a lot of fun. There's a lot going on there. It's not just slam, slam, and that's it. She is immune to non-magical attacks that aren't adamantine. Who the heck has an adamantine weapon? I don't think I've ever come across one in all of my DMing and looking at different D&D stuff. I do think this might have changed in the 2024 rules, so if you're using the new rules, bear that in mind. It says she's also immune to lightning and poison damage, but she's got an aversion to fire. So if there's a battle involving Isaac, or if someone casts Fireball, or if the coffin shop catches fire, if they bring her along to try and retrieve the bones, then that's not going to be good. She's a construct as well, so it's very easy to think, will she make the mistake of someone casts Cure Wounds on her and that'll work, but no, technically that shouldn't work. And one thing that's cool that I read somewhere that she could be healed through like lightning spells, like Shocking Grasp. Someone can just cast Shocking Grasp on her a few times and bring her back to full health. That is so cool. And it also says her attacks are considered magical as well, so she's going to be effective against people with non-magical resistance immunity. Thinking of the original 2014 rules, that's things like Vampire Spawn are resistant, I believe, and things like werewolves are immune. If driven berserk, she fights until the abbot reasserts control. So what happens if she's driven berserk, but she's away from the abbot, or the abbot's already dead? It says in the stat block that she must be able to hear its creator. Can someone fake it? Does maybe roll it with disadvantage, or maybe she has to do an insight check. Information for her lives in chapter 8, that's Krezk, S13, plus a tiny bit in like the abbot's appendix and maybe one or two other places. Party fit, if you've got a weak and squishy party, then she could be a good defender for them until she goes berserk, and then things can go really wrong. Viktor Vlakovic, the other donjon option. Realising that the characters are the key to his salvation, he enthusiastically leaves home and accompanies them to Castle Ravenloft. He wasn't the fated ally in my game, as I mentioned earlier, that was Rictavio, but he kind of became sort of like a secondary or honorary fated ally in my game, because he ended up being sort of like adopted by the party wizard. And they managed to convince him to come to Castle Ravenloft, despite already having, well, it's a long story, but actually Rictavio got captured, but they had Esmeralda as kind of a stand-in ally, and then they rescued Rictavio. But they managed to convince Victor to come along as well, with the promise of, if you help us, we'll get you out of Barovia and I'll teach you everything I know about magic. And he was like, and he rolled a really high persuasion check, so he's like, okay. And then he joined them for some adventures after Curse of Strahd, so I ran places like Fulkovnia, the Domain of Dread with zombie sieges, and he went there, and a couple of other places. He's currently not part of the party. I actually wrote him out because things like casting Fireball and Cone of Cold just make things too easy. But he's still alive, he's still chilling in Vallaki, having explored them for a bit, and he might join them when they take down Aslan Rex, who's going to be my campaign's BBEG, or at least for this arc of the campaign. He's a grumpy, moody teenager who's obsessed with magic. So I had him, he clung onto the magic types, and especially my wizard PC. And just the sort of thing of like, they talk to him and he's snappy and stressy and just, just is mean to them without caring about like, how it comes across and stuff, because he's just a moody, emotional, hormone-filled teenager. And then we were talking about Stella earlier, then obviously he was cruel to Stella. And I think I played it at first, that when they first met him, he was like, oh yeah, it was quite funny what I did to Stella with a thing with her cats, and then, cast a spell on her that made her think she was a cat. Yeah, it was good, wasn't it? And then they're all like, no, it's not good. And he's like, oh. And then as time's gone on, I've kind of made him less evil in my game. I think he's now neutral instead of evil, because my PCs have spent so much time they kind of adopted him and raised him in place of the Baron who died in my game, and he's on the path to better things. But I did have it where when there was a big battle at the Wachter house post-coup, and he turned himself invisible with great invisibility, and cast Cone of Cold inside the house, targeting Lady Wachter and then screaming, "Die!" And very sort of angry teenager. And so when later on after the battle, they realised he'd been frozen to death, and they were like, didn't someone shout die as well? And Victor's like, So he's a mage with additional spells, like I mentioned with Kasimir earlier, and he's strong. Things like Cone and Cold, Fireball, as I mentioned a couple of times in the last few minutes, can really trivialise encounters. I believe that his spells, or at least how many spells he has, how he casts them might have changed in the 2024 rules, but I do believe he's still got access to Fireball and Cone of Cold. But he might only be able to cast both once per long rest. Information for him lives in Chapter 5, N3T. That's his room, I believe. And also in the intro, there's a little bit where it says the Baron, the Baroness, the Baronet. And he has info in the Baronet section. Party fit, lacking a magic caster, consider Victor. And finally, Zuleika. She's the option for the Beast card. She would accompany the characters if they promised to avenge her mate, Emil, by killing the leader of her pack, Kirill. I actually made Kirill a loop guru from Van Richten's guide in my game, because I think they did the werewolf down at a higher level, and at that point Van Richten's guide had not long been out, and I thought, hey, this is cool, I'm going to make him a loop guru. And I even did a thing where the broken vestige in the Amber Temple was a vestige that granted people the power of loop guru, and then as soon as he got the power, he destroyed it afterwards so no one else could claim it. But the drawback, the flaw, if you will, with the dark gifts in the Amber Temple is that he's not immune to non-magical, non-silver damage, which I think is true in the Loop Guru stat block. I think like anything can hurt them, but I think you get redirect generation instead. But I thought that was a cool way to play it. I really like Lunch Break's Heroes' take on the werewolf then, and on Zuleika as well. It kind of makes her a bit more sympathetic. The party are going to feel like they want to, even though she's evil, she's a werewolf, she's a lesser evil, isn't she, than, say, Kirill doing the horrible stuff he's doing. And so she comes across as more sympathetic. She's a werewolf, so she's immune to, well, at least 2014 rules, immune to non-magical, non-silver damage. So that's going to be really handy in a fight. They should put her up front and centre as long as it's something like a zombie and not the Hags or Babylon Saga. And information for her lives in Chapter 15, that's the Werewolf Den chapter, in Z7. Plus there's a tiny mention in K75A, which is where Emil is found in Castle Ravenloft. And a cool thing happened in my campaign as well, where they did the Werewolf Den and they defeated Kirill and Zuleika became the replacement leader. Later on they found Emil when they were doing the endgame in Castle Ravenloft. They didn't know he was werewolf straight away and they didn't know his link to the Werewolf Den. They saw him transform, but then I think it says that he might turn on them at a bad moment, and he tries to turn on them and is killed. And then during the epilogue of our Curse of Strahd campaign, they were in Bluewater Inn partying, and I said people like Mordenkainen and Esmeralda and Madame Eva, even Madame Eva visited to congratulate them. And then Zuleika was there, and she's like, I heard you freed my husband Emil from the dungeons, but then you killed him. Probably best we don't cross paths for a while. My players are like, oh no. And she's not really come back into it in my post-Curse of Strahd game, but there's always that tension there. Maybe the Werewolf Den is like, I haven't decided what to do with it actually. Maybe the Werewolf Den left Barovia once everyone else could leave Barovia because Strahd was gone, temporarily. And party fit wise, party needs a meat shield. She could fill that role. And that's it. That is all, I believe, 20-ish fated allies from the card reading covered. I've been planning these videos for months, so it's nice to kind of have them done. I hope it was useful. I do appreciate with some of them I might have literally just spent 30 seconds talking about them because it's really difficult with some of them. People like Klutz and the two Wachter choices, but hopefully it's been handy for you. Upcoming videos for Curse of Strahd, I think the next Curse of Strahd video I want to do is alternative fated allies. So if none of the ones in the book take your fancy, you can consider other Curse. I'm going to probably split it into two halves. So probably be like in one video, I should stress. One part will be other NPCs in Curse of Strahd who could be a good fit as a fated ally, or people you could add to Curse of Strahd, such as Jander Sunstar, who was in the novel Vampire of the Mists and previously visited Barovia. Maybe he was there the whole time. Maybe he's never left. Maybe he left and has come back. I don't know. And then on Ravenloft front, I think the next Ravenloft video I'm going to do is how I ran Tovag, because in my home game, I've just run Tovag, the Domain of Dread, the Dark Lord of which is Kaz, that's Vecna's rival, infamous Vecna, and my home game they're about to do Hazlan, so it's going to be a while off, but then there'll be some Hazlan videos, and in the meantime I'll probably just do some more Ravenloft videos like I tend to cover off Ravenloft NPCs, Mist Wanderers, things like that. And we'll leave it there. Thank you, Mist Wanderers.